As long as it's something I want to do, I will definitely get it done. This is Yi's life motto. Even though she's just the daughter of a suit shop owner in the countryside, from a young age, she's been able to learn the kind of things rich girls enjoy, like playing piano and learning English. The reason for this is that when Yumi was little, she met a foreign military couple who came to get clothes tailored, and she happened to meet the wife. The woman was amazed by Yumi's intelligence, so she often took her home and taught her some hobbies of the upper-class nobility. This lucky meeting seemed to be the stroke of fortune that changed Yumi's life, but the girl forgot that gifts from fate often come with a price. The officer's wife was a corrupt woman. Living in the faraway Korean countryside made her feel lonely. To distance herself from the backwardness of the area, she began to deceive people by claiming she was a noblewoman and even bragged that she was Princess Diana's biological sister to get attention. Not only that, she also taught Yumi how to deceive and lie, saying that you should stay calm when you have a trump card and never let others see through your heart. That's how you can be invincible. Before long, the officer and his wife left the countryside. Before leaving, the wife told Yumi to always keep a calm face. Yumi engraved this saying in her heart, and as she grew up, she used her talents and calm demeanor to make those around her believe her useless lies. Everything went smoothly until Yumi fell in love during high school, and her life took a drastic turn. Just a few months before the college entrance exams, the school unexpectedly discovered that she had feelings for her music teacher. A student-teacher romance was a serious violation of school rules. To save his job, the music teacher put all the blame on Yumi, accusing her of being the one who approached him. Yumi was heartbroken. This was the first time her well-crafted lies had failed her. As she was hurt by someone else's lie, in the end, the music teacher was only temporarily suspended, but Yumi had no choice but to transfer school immediately. One early morning, she left her hometown in despair with her father to move to Seoul. Due to her violation of the school's strict rules and the urgency of the situation, the new school initially didn't want to accept Yumi. However, considering her excellent grades, they made an exception. The only request from her new teacher was for Yumi to avoid making friends and to focus solely on her studies. Her father found her a small room to live in, gave her some living expenses, and left Seoul. Far from her familiar hometown, Yumi lost her original lifestyle. There was no chance for her to build up lies anymore, and without any praise, she fell into despair. Her once confident gaze now lacked any self-assurance. Her grades quickly dropped, and she completely failed to get into university after the college entrance exam results came out. Yumi was overwhelmed with disappointment over not being accepted. Shortly after, her father called to inform her that her mother was suffering from Alzheimer's disease and advised her to come home when she had time. Her father also kindly asked about her university entrance exam results. Yumi couldn't bring herself to admit that she had failed. After much internal struggle, she lied, telling her father that she had been accepted into university. After receiving gifts and money from her parents to celebrate, Yumi began to build on that lie. She spent a lot of money to retake classes in hopes of trying again. During this time, Yumi shared a room with a girl named Jo, a student at the same university. When Jo learned that Yumi was supposedly attending the same university, she eagerly befriended her, exchanged phone numbers, and even invited her to join the university magazine's editorial team. However, Yumi, knowing she wasn't a real student, declined with the excuse that she wasn't interested. Jo didn't suspect anything, assuming that Yumi was just a shy, introverted girl. Especially with her innocent and harmless face, no one would think that Yumi was a master of lies. Looking at the lively university campus, Yumi longed to be a real student. That day, after Yumi finished her exam review class, Jo invited her to the editorial club for pizza. Surrounded by the energetic student atmosphere, with all the girls gathered together, Yumi couldn't hold back anymore. She began to relax, and when someone asked where she was from, Yumi let it slip that she had lived in America when she was younger, making everyone envious. The compliments were the only thing that made Yumi happy. No one would ever imagine that the shy girl was actually a skilled liar. Jo thought Yumi was adorable and even gave her an exclusive t-shirt from the editorial club before leaving. Not long after, Yumi finished her exam prep course and proceeded to take the university entrance exam once again. As soon as she finished the test, she slumped over her desk in despair, fearing she wouldn't make it into university this time either. While walking home, Jo called her and invited her to the editorial club's meeting. During this lively party, the beautiful Yumi attracted a lot of attention. The male students happily surrounded her, doing everything to please her. That night, Yumi met a guy named Jean, and soon, she fell into a whirlwind romance with him. A few days later, the teacher from her exam prep class called and advised Yumi not to aim for such a difficult university like Seoul National University, warning that she would likely fail again. But Yumi would rather retake the exam a third time than settle for a third-rate university. After Yumi and Jean had been together for a while, one day Jean told her that he had the opportunity to be an exchange student in New York. He didn't want to leave Yumi behind, so he suggested that she come with him, and after they graduated, they could naturally get married. He mentioned that he had already told his mother about Yumi, and his family wanted to meet their future daughter-in-law. Finally, Yumi could go to the place she had always dreamed of, America. She was elated, but studying abroad required a lot of money, so she had no choice but to return home and ask her father for help. Her father worked hard to gather enough money for her to study abroad. But just before she boarded the plane, fate cruelly intervened. Jean received a call from his mother, who revealed that everything about Yumi was a lie. She told him that there was no one named Yumi on the student roster at the university and warned him to stay away from this liar. After the plane took off, Yumi left the airport alone and returned to her shabby rented room, even taking a week off from work. One morning, she received a call from a neighbor in her hometown. It turned out that her father had passed away. He had cancer and originally wanted to tell Yumi before she left for America, but he didn't want to affect her future, so he kept it a secret. Yumi returned home, dragging her large suitcases, and knelt before her father's coffin, crying bitterly. She was filled with regret because one lie had made her miss the chance to see her father one last time. After her father's death, Yumi began to sell off his suit shop. While going through the account books, she realized that her parents had lived their whole lives frugally, with all their enormous expenses spent solely on her. This realization only deepened her sorrow. When she returned to Seoul without a proper education, she had to survive by doing odd jobs in various places. And just like that, a few years passed by. One day, she came across an online post. It was a job advertisement that didn't require any educational qualifications. She went to the address on the job listing to submit her application. It was an art exhibition company run by a family, and the chairman was an author named Lu. Yumi's job was to serve the chairman's daughter, Lu Hanzu, with dedication. Author Lu had no other expectations for Yumi, except that she keep her promises and work hard. Lu Hanzu's mother was a devout religious follower who frequently gathered with her church group. Hanzu's mother was at home praying, while Hanzu herself had just recently returned from the US. Her lively and ambitious personality clashed with the conservative atmosphere of her family. One day, Hanzu and her mother were about to meet some guests. Her mother thought Hanzu's outfit was too revealing and told Yumi to fetch more appropriate clothing. This was Yumi's first time entering Hanzu's room, and she was taken aback by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that filled the room with light. The dazzling walk-in closet left her dizzy. Yumi had never seen anything like it. At that moment, she spotted a beautiful pair of high heels on the floor. She tried them on and found they fit her perfectly. Her slim, beautiful feet looked elegant in those shoes. Everything seemed just right, but none of it was hers. Hanzu's life was the real version of Yumi's lies. It was so close, yet Yumi could only stand at the base of her dreams, staring up at the beautiful life Hanzu lived. Though Hanzu occasionally gave Yumi things like a watch she no longer liked, it wasn't out of care or friendship. It felt more like charity for someone of a lower class. And it wasn't just Hanzu. Her father, author Lu, looked down on the help even more. Once, when Yumi went to ask for time off, it felt like she was staring down the barrel of a gun. Author Lu hated it when employees took leave, calling them stupid and lazy. He would say that's why they spent their whole lives stuck at the bottom of society. His words cut Yumi deeply, but she had no choice but to continue serving Hanzu with a smile. Hanzu was in a bad mood due to some wedding arrangements and was preparing to fly abroad for a vacation. She told Yumi that she wasn't happy. Yumi felt a stab of pain. If someone like Hanzu could feel unhappy, what did her own suffering count for? Yumi took out Hanzu's American passport, which had her English name, Anna, written on it. She noticed the visa would expire in a month and informed Hanzu. But Hanzu carelessly dropped the passport to the floor, telling Yumi to get it renewed and not bother her with trivial matters that would only give her a headache. Yumi picked up the passport and left the room, emotionless on the outside but burning with a long-suppressed rage on the inside. The beautiful fantasies she once held had been tarnished by reality. The years of hardship had changed her fundamentally, and a voice screamed in her mind. She had longed for an illusionary life for far too long, That night, Yumi took money from the art gallery and Hanzu's American passport and left the gallery while snow was falling. She decided she would pursue what she wanted at all costs, just as her life motto had always been, "If it's something I want to do, I'll definitely make it happen." After fleeing the gallery, Yumi returned to her hometown to visit her mother. The next morning, when she woke up, she turned on her phone and saw a barrage of missed calls and messages. Ignoring them all, she noticed a call from Joe. After thinking for a moment, she called him back. To Joe, Yumi's image hadn't crumbled yet. She wanted to use Joe, a journalist with many connections, to help her find a job. Just as she had expected, Joe introduced her to a good position as a teacher at an art prep school. When filling out her personal information, Yumi opened Hanzu's passport and entered all the details. Yumi adopted the name Anna for her job application, using Hanzu's academic credentials and Joe's referral to secure the position. Before the interview, Yumi went to great lengths to style herself like a wealthy lady, renting a luxury outfit to match the part. With Hanzu's academic background and Joe's endorsement, she quickly earned the trust of the art prep school administrators and was able to start teaching right away. After returning the rented outfit, Yumi took the luxury watch that Hanzu had given her to pay for the rental. The shop assistant told her that the brand had been embroiled in a counterfeiting scandal in recent years, so now the watch was stigmatized within the industry. This explained why Hanzu had casually handed it off to her. It was something undesirable. This insult stayed with Yumi. She could not tolerate being trampled upon and vowed to never let herself be humiliated again. To secure her place in the new job, Yumi officially changed her name to Anna and visited multiple study abroad institutions under the guise of being a consultant, learning the intricacies of the industry. She then passed this information along to the students she taught, enhancing her professional image. Her intelligence and natural acting abilities deceived everyone she encountered. One night, Yumi received a call from a neighbor informing her that due to a road construction project, her father's suit shop would be seized, and she would receive compensation. Yumi used part of this money to place her mother in a nursing home and rented a better furnished apartment in Seoul with the remainder. She also bought a few high-end counterfeit outfits to maintain her image as Anna. At her tutoring job, Yumi encountered a teacher who had been a classmate of Hanzu during their time abroad. Although the teacher had heard of Hanzu, she had never met her, so she didn't doubt Yumi's identity. Despite her lack of a formal education, Yumi was an exceptional tutor, with many of her students gaining acceptance into universities. Her success reduced any suspicion about her background, and 2 more years passed as she meticulously maintained her fabricated life. One day, teacher Yoon approached Yumi with an opportunity. She offered to introduce her as a liberal arts professor at a prestigious university, a position that would add even more prestige to Yumi's resume. However, teacher Yoon made it clear that this recommendation wasn't free. Yumi would need to pay for the chance. To cover the cost, Yumi downgraded from a full lease apartment to a monthly rental. Teacher Yoon took Yumi to meet the university's board. Yumi, elegant and intellectual, passed the interview with flying colors. Once she became a lecturer at this renowned university, she was admired as a respected professor. Yumi worked diligently, memorizing the analyses of classic literary works that she taught in her classes. She projected an image of profound knowledge and wisdom. Her beauty and friendly teaching style increased her popularity, and her classes attracted more and more students. As Yumi's reputation as Professor Anna grew, other faculty members, impressed by her talent and her single status, eagerly sought to play matchmaker for her. Yumi was introduced to a representative from a publicly traded company, Jaihin, by one of her university colleagues. When they first met, Jaihin bragged about his wealth and his taste in art. However, Yumi wasn't impressed by his style, and even used a metaphor about a sofa to subtly critique his aesthetic choices. She declined his advances, citing that she wasn't ready for marriage. But Jaihin didn't give up easily. He requested that Yumi meet with him at least 3 times, and if there was still no connection, he would respect her decision. Yumi reluctantly agreed but found herself viewing Jaihin as unsophisticated and lacking the refinement that a wealthy individual should possess. He seemed more like a nouveau riche, flaunting his newfound wealth. And indeed, Jaihin admitted to Yumi that he had built his fortune from scratch, primarily through stock speculation. Although he worked in the IT sector, he had no formal education, only attending a lifelong learning college at a prestigious school after making his fortune. Learning about his background, Yumi began to feel a sense of empathy towards him. She realized that they were more alike than she initially thought. Both had no formal education and had climbed their way up from nothing. This realization made Jaihin more appealing to Yumi, and soon, the two started dating. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they soon began discussing marriage. During a visit to her mother, who communicated through sign language, her mother told Yumi about a dream in which Yumi was crying and seemed to be heading far away. Yumi felt saddened by this but reassured her mother that she wasn't going anywhere far. She was simply getting married. However, because Yumi's identity was fabricated, her real mother couldn't attend the wedding. Instead, Yumi hired actors to pose as her parents. Soon after, Yumi and Jaehyun held a grand wedding, and she officially entered the upper class as the wife of a company executive. During the family photo session, Jaehyun's father called up a young boy, a cousin who seemed slightly autistic, to join them in the picture. The boy became fascinated with Yumi's bouquet, speaking at length about different subjects he was knowledgeable about. After the wedding, Yumi became Jaehyun's prized trophy. For Jaehyun, who had built his wealth from nothing, marrying a well-educated woman was a point of pride. Like many businessmen, once Jaehyun had accumulated a significant amount of wealth, he sought fame and recognition. He began taking Yumi to various elite gatherings, hoping to expand his connections and perhaps one day enter the political arena. However, as they met more influential people, the name Hanzu came up more and more frequently, and Yumi silently hoped Jaehyun would steer clear of politics. One day, Jaehyun attended a scholarship award ceremony, and the next person to give a speech was a young girl who was deaf. Since the sign language interpreter didn't arrive in time, Yumi stepped in to translate for the girl. Noticing how anxious the girl was, Yumi comforted her in sign language. In that moment, Yumi was the only one who could truly understand and convey the girl's words, as no one else present knew sign language. The little girl burst into laughter as Yumi comforted her on stage, translating the girl's speech in sign language for the audience. After her speech, the girl hugged Yumi tightly, drawing applause from the crowd and media alike. Jaehyun was especially pleased with Yumi's actions, knowing that a successful politician needed to display this kind of empathy. That night, as Yumi returned home, she took the elevator up to her apartment, but to her shock, a familiar face entered, none other than Hanzu. Yumi's expression immediately shifted to one of fear. She lowered her head, trying to avoid eye contact with Hanzu, but it was too late. Hanzu had already noticed her and, after a moment of thought, finally asked, "Are you Yumi?" Yumi, terrified, said nothing and tried to avoid responding. Her usual grace and sophistication seemed to vanish in that moment. As soon as she got home, she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. From that day on, Yumi began to feel a deep sense of unease. Hanzu's sudden reappearance had cracked the protective shell around Yumi's new life, and things got even worse when she discovered that Haein-do, Hanzu's former companion, appeared to be living in the same building. The next evening, Yumi unexpectedly bumped into Haein-do in the parking lot, which deepened her anxiety. Yumi reached out to her former colleagues from Hanzu's household to gather more information. She learned that Lu, Hanzu's father, had passed away the previous year, and his company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Hanzu had also recently returned to the country following a divorce and was now pursuing a career in fashion. Whether she planned to return abroad or stay remained unclear. This information intensified Yumi's sense of crisis. The next day, Yumi tried to persuade Jaehyun to move to a new home, telling him she wanted a place with windows that could fully open. But Jaehyun, whose only concern about homes was their price and the status they conveyed, rejected her request. The house they currently lived in perfectly matched his desire to show off his wealth, and he saw no reason to move. Feeling helpless, Yumi sought out Jaehyun's advice. Jaehyun was eager to work in the political branch of media, and since Yumi felt indebted to him for all the help he had given her, she offered to assist. Jaehyun agreed, but as always, there was a price to pay. He asked Yumi to socialize with the wives of influential politicians to build relationship. Although Yumi didn't like the idea, she felt she had no choice but to agree. Despite Jaehyun's public persona of integrity, his private life was another story. Arrogant and domineering, he ignored neighbors' complaints, drilling loudly at night. He would even hit his driver for arriving late by just a few seconds. The way he reprimanded the help was reminiscent of Lee's cruel nature, which deeply unsettled Yumi, as it brought back painful memories of her past. One day, a former student of Yumi's visited her, bringing American snacks that Yumi had once mentioned she liked. Yumi thanked her kindly, but inside she was filled with mixed emotions. Since Jaehyun refused to move, Yumi began taking the stairs daily to avoid running into Hanzu, and this continued for a while. Yet, once the protective shell around Yumi's life started to crack, it only continued to widen. The moment Yumi stepped out of the stairwell that day, she saw Hanzu holding a letter from the university and asking her what it was all about. The name of the school on the envelope was clearly the one Hanzu had attended, and Yi's name had been replaced by her English alias, Anna. Under Hanzu's interrogation, Yumi had no choice but to confess everything. She fell to her knees in front of Hanzu, begging for time, promising to stop as long as Hanzu gave her a little leeway. But Hanzu had no intention of forgiving her. After all, Yumi had stolen her life and was living it even better than she had. This was the price Yumi had to pay for her deceit. Hanzu demanded that Yumi prepare 3 billion won by the following month, but such a condition was like throwing herself into a tiger's den. Even though Yumi was married to a wealthy businessman, she was just a decorative tool for Jaihin. She had no real power or money. But Hanzu didn't care about that. All she cared about was the result. Before leaving, she even mocked Yumi by telling her to continue taking the stairs and stay out of her sight. One evening, Jaihin had been out drinking with a group of politicians. When he got to the parking lot, he was so drunk that he passed out in the car. The building's security guard called Yumi to come down and take Jaihin home. But when she arrived, she saw another woman in the passenger seat. Yumi immediately slammed the car door shut, turned around, and called the police, reporting that someone was drinking and driving. Meanwhile, Jo had recently joined the political media division, and she too was drinking with her colleagues. Because she had relied on connections to get into this position and was the only woman at the gathering, the male colleagues relentlessly teased her throughout the night. But Jo remained unfazed. After the party, as she watched her intoxicated colleagues stumble away, she knew this was an opportunity to impress them and advance her standing. The next morning at breakfast, Yumi casually asked why the police had been looking for Jaihin. Jaihin dodged the question, instead steering the conversation toward the creation of a scholarship fund, with Yumi as its chairperson. This meant that from now on, Yumi would frequently appear in the media. Instinctively, she resisted the idea, but Jaihin told her that money and power only held value if others could see them, especially during election periods. He even went as far as to say that every breath they took had to be something society would assess. Hearing this, Yumi fell silent. At that moment, the woman from the previous night walked into their home, casually unlocking the door. Jaihin announced that from now on, he would be going to work and returning home with his secretary. When the secretary introduced herself to Yumi, she couldn't help but notice the irony. This woman's name was also Yumi. With Hanzu's demand for 3 billion won weighing on her, Yumi began to rack her brain for a solution. One day, the housemaid asked for leave the next day, which happened to be the day when Jaihin was scheduled to host a dinner for a group of politicians. This small request irritated Yumi further. Normally calm and composed, she suddenly lashed out at the maid, yelling uncontrollably. Without thinking, she spewed the same degrading words that both Lu and Jaihin had used before, demanding to know why people from lower classes always seemed to cause trouble for her. The words left her mouth before Yumi realized that she, too, had unconsciously developed the same disdain for the lower class. Even though taking a day off was a significant event in the maid's life, Yumi found herself thinking that it wasn't nearly as important as a dinner party. When Yumi lost her calm, she didn't realize when the secretary had quietly stepped aside. Seeing her, Yumi gradually regained her composure. In the end, Yumi approved the maid's request for leave. The secretary picked up Yumi and accompanied her to the party. On the way, Yumi chatted with the secretary, commenting that working beside Jaihin must be tough, but as soon as the secretary spoke, all she had were praises for him. Yumi calmly replied that everyone knew how to lie, asking if the secretary really didn't know what kind of person Jaihin was. The car stopped outside the restaurant, but the secretary didn't rush Yumi out. She wanted to check if all the guests were present first. This gesture reminded Yumi of the old days when she used to assist Hanzu, helping her with small tasks like confirming if all the guests had arrived at the party. The secretary now was like a miniature version of Yumi in the past. Tonight was a dinner party for politicians. Jaihin had just made a bold statement at the wine table. The next moment, the secretary received a call and quietly whispered to him, and the joy on Jaihin's face gradually faded. One day, Jean and Jo met. From the moment Jean returned from the US, they had been in contact, but this time, Jean was the one who reached out because there was something he needed to tell Jo. As soon as they sat down, Jean took out his phone, showing an article about Jaihin and E. Jean asked if that was Anna, Jaihin's ex-girlfriend. Jo nodded, thinking Jean was reminiscing about his past relationship, but Jean then revealed something shocking. Yumi had never been a university student but had failed the university entrance exams 3 times. When they were dating, he discovered Yumi was a liar. Hearing this, Jo was stunned and asked how this could be true. Even though she couldn't believe it, Jean had reasons to say so. Jo, adhering to his principle of seeking the truth, began investigating Yumi's background. She first called the university to check the list of admitted students that year, asking if there was anyone named Yumi. The results showed that although there were many people named Yumi, none of them had graduated from the art department. Not giving up, Jo then investigated the name Luana but still couldn't find anyone like that. Jo even visited the house where Yumi had rented during her university years and heard even more bizarre things. The landlord was very impressed by Yumi because back then, she was still 2 months behind on her rent and had suddenly rushed to the US, leaving behind a mess for the landlord to handle. The landlord had personally gone to Yumi's hometown to find her father to collect the rent. According to the landlord's description, Yumi's hometown was in a small rural town where her parents ran a suit shop. The family didn't seem wealthy. Following Yumi's life trajectory, Jo went to the art class where Yumi used to work. The person in charge recalled Yumi's performance, mentioning her tutoring skills were excellent, helping many students get into prestigious schools. If there was anything strange about her, it was that her English skills were somewhat lacking. Strangely enough, Jo requested to see the personal information and academic certificates that Yumi had submitted when she applied for the job. On the other side, Yumi was overwhelmed with the struggle of earning money, and she truly felt powerless. One day, in the parking lot, Yumi saw Hanzu talking on the phone before heading inside. Yumi pressed the gear, desperately wanting the other person to just disappear, but when she was about to hit Hanzu, Yumi lost her courage and hesitated, only to be mocked by Hanzu. Due to her deal with Jaihin, Yumi began meeting the wives of politicians to build connections. Like many other politicians' wives, they were merely tools for their husbands to gain more power. The so-called close relationships were just a way for them to facilitate various transactions. As someone who had recently stepped into the political scene, Jaihin was naturally surrounded by people bearing gifts, but Yumi didn't like this kind of socializing. She treated the woman bringing gifts coldly, showing no interest even when the other person handed her 100 million won. That night, in the parking lot, Yumi unexpectedly encountered Hanzu again. Yumi handed her 100 million won, saying she had tried her best, but Hanzu didn't care and threw the money on the ground, taunting Yumi, suggesting that if she needed money, she should ask her husband or let her help if she didn't know how to ask. Despite Hanzu's threats, Yumi found a glimmer of hope in her words. After returning home, she began listing the wives of the congressman she needed to meet. If everyone could offer money, she could make 3 billion won. From that moment, Yumi's attitude towards the congressman's wives took a complete 180-degree turn. She tried her best to show her friendly side, making the wives pleased with her. As she looked at the money bags that these wives brought, Yumi's heart gradually grew more at ease. Jo's investigation had reached Yi's high school years. She traveled to her hometown, and upon getting out of the car, she luckily stepped into a snack shop run by Yi's neighbor, who had cared for Yumi's mother for many years. Hearing Jo talk about Yi, the neighbor's expression was full of pride. Both the neighbor and Yi's mother believed Yumi was still in the US. Following this lead, Jo went to Yumi's high school and learned about her past there. Yumi had been outstanding in both appearance and academics, but she loved the feeling of being the center of attention. In her final year, she fell into a romance with a young teacher, and the major setback from this relationship forced her to transfer to Seoul. The teacher remembered how, several times, Yumi would return from Seoul to her hometown, crying all night at home, only to catch the first bus back to Seoul in the morning. People like her, who grow up with constant praise, can become very fragile once they realize their worth isn't real. So the teacher was also curious about what kind of person Yumi had become. At this moment, Jo received a call from her superior, requesting her to spend the evening with Jean. Jo wanted to refuse, but when she heard that the person who had referred her for the job was Jean, she quickly turned back to meet him. As soon as they sat down, Jean presented her with a gift, which contained exclusive information from a competitor. He wanted Jo to appreciate his recommendation and become his warrior to destroy her enemies in the public opinion arena, which would help her remove obstacles and also assist her in her ambitions. He helping Jo greatly in her career, but Jo wasn't happy about becoming someone who cuts corners. This made her feel humiliated because, after all, the principle of becoming a journalist for her was about uncovering the truth, not her career prospects. Jo immediately put the documents down, clearly wanting to refuse. Seeing this, Jin didn't get angry. He just felt she hadn't yet tasted the pain of being suppressed and shouldn't make things harder for herself by moving forward only because of cheap pride. He advised her to learn from Yumi. No matter how outstanding she was just a university professor. Only by seizing the chance to marry him could she have a more glorious life. Listening to Jin's smug words, Zhou showed a displeased expression. After sending Jin off, Zhou received Yi's resume. The email from the foreign university confirmed that there was indeed someone named Anna with credentials from their school. Now Zhou was more confused than ever about who Yumi really was. Today, Hanzu's daughter and her husband returned to the country, and she went to the airport to pick them up. Despite a slight flight delay, she was extremely dissatisfied with her husband. Hanzu has always been a princess who gets whatever she wants, never caring about anyone else's thoughts, except for her daughter, who is truly important to her. Hanzu and her husband were in the midst of a divorce. As soon as she met her daughter, Hanzu hugged the little girl joyfully and left, letting her husband drag the luggage. He was eager to finalize the divorce so he wouldn't have to see Hanzu again. After her daughter returned to Seoul, Hanzu started buying lots of toys and clothes for her, happily bringing her home to play. In reality, Hanzu's life after returning to the country wasn't great. She only spent money but didn't earn any. After Liu Author's death, she almost lost all her family assets and even borrowed 3 billion with her real estate as collateral behind her mother's back. This is precisely why she demanded 3 billion from Yumi. Not long after, Jaihin was elected as a candidate for Seoul's mayoral position. Yumi went on stage to present flowers to her husband, capturing affectionate photos of the couple in front of the cameras. The crowd chanted Anna's name, but she simply sat calmly beside Jaihin, feeling no joy inside. Jaihin and his team stayed up all night celebrating. Yumi couldn't bear it any longer, so she left early. After the secretary took her home, she hurried to another event, likely working on a schedule similar to Jaihin's. Entering the elevator, the exhausted secretary slumped to the floor. Yumi, back at home, didn't even have the strength to bathe. She lay straight on the floor and fell asleep. Whether at the top or the bottom, the name Yumi was always a symbol of vanity. Underneath the bright exterior was a miserable soul crushed by money and power. The next day, Yumi woke up and continued meeting with various other ladies, with more and more people coming to offer gifts. Yumi would only have to say a few words to easily collect a large amount of money, making her question her own life. In the evening, Yumi went to the pharmacy to buy digestive medicine and saw a news report on TV about a 30-year-old woman who, disappointed with her life, ended it by burning charcoal in her car. On the way home, Yumi happened to pass by the house of the deceased woman featured in the news. She couldn't help but feel emotional. If she hadn't woven so many lies, perhaps she wouldn't have ventured down a path leading to such a tragic end. When she entered the apartment complex, she no longer took the stairs, but instead pressed the elevator button. Yumi returned home and watched the news about the 30-year-old woman who ended her life by burning charcoal. The deceased was Hanzu. She recalled the time when Hanzu had blackmailed her, demanding that Yumi continue taking the stairs and not appear in front of her again. Yumi concluded that someone as domineering as Hanzu would never take her own life. Jaihin came home shortly after and questioned Yumi about why she didn't attend such an important event today. She said she had guests. Anyway, on such occasions, Yumi would only sit there quietly like a flower vase, and even if she were absent, it wouldn't be a big deal. Jaihin was dissatisfied with her attitude towards him. He asked his wife condescendingly, making Yumi feel like an employee working under Jaihin. Previously, when Jaihin fired a driver, he had spoken in the same tone. Seeing that Yumi was openly contradicting him, no longer being obedient, even she demanded him to stop teaching her classes. Yumi had no intention of following his orders. Seeing this, Jaihin assigned his secretary to watch Yumi, intending to monitor her every move. The next day, Jaihin and his wife attended the Scholarship Fund's founding event. Yumi gave a graceful speech on stage, adding radiance to Jaihin's face and earning applause. Jaihin also delivered various speeches showcasing his political ideals. His impassioned address immediately ignited the audience. In the end, Jaihin even knelt down before the public, demonstrating his political commitment to serving the nation and its people. Besides cooperating with Jaihin in attending various activities, Yumi also had her own life. She enjoyed her teaching time. One day after class, she was suddenly informed that since Jaihin would continue his campaign, she would have to temporarily stop teaching. The moment Yumi heard this, she knew that Jaihin was behind it. Ultimately, she reluctantly signed the temporary leave form under the name Luana. The secretary, now fully working under Yumi, was instructed to investigate the addresses of the fired driver and other employees who had been dismissed for unclear reasons. The secretary didn't understand why, but Yumi didn't say much, only insisting that she keep it secret and not reveal this to Jaehyun. Not long after, Yumi met with the driver. Lately, she had been frequently contacting dismissed employees, hoping to uncover some lesser-known secrets about Jaehyun through them. However, the driver had signed a confidentiality agreement and didn't dare to say a word. Yumi persuaded him, arguing that a man like Jaehyun, so different from his outward appearance, was not fit to be the mayor of Seoul. Meanwhile, Joe's colleague pointed her to an old website where she purchased a yearbook album of Anna from her former school abroad. After viewing it, Joe realized that the name Anna was actually Hanzu's. Joe contacted Anna's former classmate, who still remembered that Anna had two names. Her Korean name was Hanzu, and her English name was Anna. The classmate also mentioned that Hanzu had lived in Boston until last year when she returned to Korea to file for divorce. Additionally, they revealed another piece of information. Hanzu had hired someone to write her thesis for her. Following this lead, Joe, in her capacity as a journalist, went to the police station to inquire about Hanzu's death. The police confirmed that Hanzu had indeed committed suicide. She had debts from stock trading, was on the verge of divorce, and had been drinking heavily for a long time. She frequently visited casinos, and her mother disclosed that Hanzu had bipolar disorder. The next day was another beautiful day. Yumi participated in a volunteer event, and when interviewed, she radiated confidence, her face smiling brightly in front of others. But after a busy day, Yumi sat helplessly in her car, not wanting to return to that cold house. The secretary handed over the tax files of the company under investigation to Yumi, and the two began chatting in the car. To the secretary, she could never truly understand her boss's state of mind, and Yumi felt the same way. Feeling down, Yumi borrowed a cigarette and a lighter from the secretary before heading home. Joe returned to the newsroom only to find everyone busy. She then learned that they had recently received a hot tip about Jaehyun. It turned out that Jaehyun once had a wife and an autistic child. The leadership instructed everyone to write articles on this revelation quickly. Meanwhile, Jaehyun also received the news and was furious, demanding his subordinates kneel to vent his frustration. If this incident were exposed, it could end his political career. As he was scolding them, the staff's phones all rang simultaneously. Another piece of negative news about Yumi had surfaced online, revealing that her thesis was fake, worsening the situation. Jaehyun immediately called Yumi, informing her that he had found the person who wrote her thesis and that they would be interviewed in a few hours to declare they didn't ghostwrite for Yumi, asserting instead that they and Anna were research partners. For safety reasons, Jaehyun ordered Yumi to stay away from the media in the coming days and to be more cautious with her words and actions until the storm passed. From this conversation, Yumi realized that Jaehyun already knew her true identity. Jaehyun no longer hid the truth and even mentioned that Hanzu was quite bold to have reached out to him directly. After saying this, he gave a sinister smile. Yumi understood the shocking reality from his expression, and suddenly, her hair stood on end. Jaehyun signaled for her to keep quiet and ordered the bodyguard to take Yumi home. Once they reached the parking lot, she lingered, reluctant to go up to her apartment. Suddenly, she heard Hanzu's voice and instinctively walked toward it. Hanzu began recounting the origin of the name Anna, explaining that as a child, everyone praised her for being like a princess and called her Anastasia. However, Hanzu later learned that the famous Princess Anna had died young and was also impersonated by others, leading her to abandon the name Anna altogether. Yumi felt a sharp pain. She felt devastated because even the identity she had stolen was fake. Hanzu scolded her, accusing Yumi of being the one who caused her death, saying, "From now on, Yumi will live in hell." After saying this, she turned and left. Ever since the incident with Hanzu, the couple had become inseparable, but Yumi started growing more disgusted with her husband. In private, they would drop their masks. Yumi would bring up Jaehyun's ex-wife and child, while Jaehyun would remind Yumi that she was just the daughter of a tailor. They would also talk about Hanzu. Jaehyun believed he had cleared the obstacles in their way, thinking that Yumi should be grateful for him saving her from trouble. But Yumi disagreed with his approach. In a sudden burst of anger, Jaehyun grabbed Yumi by the neck. Only when she was nearly choking did he let go. He whispered in her ear that he didn't want that woman to die either, but things had come this far, and now Yumi was an accomplice, whether she liked it or not. Despite the scandal involving Jaehyun breaking out, his approval ratings soared. Major news outlets reported on the situation, and pictures of Yumi started circulating. During an interview, Yumi used her acting skills, stating that she no longer cared about the rumors surrounding her thesis. As for Jaehyun's sick child, she didn't want the kid to be a target of criticism. Meanwhile, Jaehyun's subordinates informed him that Yumi had received up to 3 billion won from others. Upon hearing this, Jaehyun immediately contacted a psychiatric hospital, telling them Yumi had mental issues and that he wanted to have her committed after the election. But Yumi had her own plans. She took the initiative and met with Jo, who admitted that she knew Yumi had been using someone else's identity. Yumi explained that her life had been so difficult that she grew envious of Hansu's lifestyle, which led her down the path of deceit. Yumi pulled out a USB containing evidence. Inside were details of her using Hansu's identity, evidence of Hansu's murder, and proof that Jaehyun's ex-wife didn't die from a simple accident but from foul play. It also contained information about Jaehyun's manipulation of stock prices, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Even the hot search results related to Jaehyun and the ghostwriter behind his thesis had been orchestrated by Yumi. Unfortunately, in the end, Jaehyun managed to suppress Yumi, forcing her to expose everything by destroying herself. After everything was done, Yumi visited her mother in a nursing home. Her mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's, no longer recognized her and always thought her daughter was in America. She even asked Yumi to write a letter to her daughter overseas. This made Yumi feel sorrow deep in her heart. On the way home, she asked her secretary to help take care of her mother in case something ever happened to her. The election results were about to be announced when Yumi received a call from the nursing home, saying that her mother was looking for her. Sensing that things were going wrong, Yumi's mood hit rock bottom. At that moment, the news of Jaehyun being elected mayor of Seoul was broadcast on TV, and everyone cheered. Only Yumi looked sad, completely out of place with the celebrating crowd. After the successful election, Jaehyun wanted to go to America as soon as possible to pick up his son. However, after receiving a message from Yumi reminding him of something, Jaehyun contacted the prosecutor. Just as he finished his campaign, Jaehyun planned to rush to the airport. But then, Yumi stopped him to deliver news about her mother. Yumi's mother was seriously ill in the nursing home, so she wanted to go there. At this moment, Jaehyun was still joking around, insisting that her mother was in America. But Yumi's face was dark and troubled. Jaehyun didn't want her to leave at such a critical time. Yumi had no choice but to board the plane to America with Jaehyun. On the plane, Yumi received the devastating news that her mother had passed away. She suddenly broke down, unable to hold back her tears. When they arrived in America, Jaehyun specifically asked for Yumi's passport to rent a car. He then took her and drove to meet his son. Along the way, Yumi received a message saying that Jo's side had encountered obstacles, as someone higher up had blocked the prosecutor from proceeding. Yumi sighed in frustration. Jaehyun, without reason, tried to convince Yumi to take some time off, saying she had been overdoing things lately. In that moment, Yumi suddenly realized Jaehyun wasn't there to pick up his son, but to imprison her. Jaehyun openly admitted it, and Yumi panicked, turning to look at him. She noticed that he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. Her mind began racing as she looked at the emergency brake. At that moment, Jaehyun glanced back at Yumi, only to suddenly see a deer in the road ahead. He frantically swerved, and in the chaos, the car lost control and crashed into a telephone pole. Yumi, trembling, climbed out of the car. After taking a moment to calm herself, she took Jaehyun's passport. Jaehyun, trapped in the driver's seat, was screaming for Yumi to help him, but she remained still. She walked far away to find a signal for her phone. A while later, she received a message from Jo that their plan had failed, and that the prosecutor's office was completely unreliable. At this point, Jo, frustrated with the prosecutor's office, climbed out of a window to escape the bad guys who were coming after her. When Yumi received the news, she felt utterly disappointed. If justice couldn't defeat evil, then she would turn herself into a flame in the shadows to do what was right. Because once Yumi set her mind on something, she was determined to make it happen. With that, Yumi set fire to the silk scarf tied to her bag and walked towards Jaehyun. News of Jaehyun's death quickly spread, while Yumi vanished. Not long after, Jaehyun's funeral was held, but it was incredibly empty. Aside from a few reporters, the only other person there was his son, who was playing nearby, unaware of what was happening. A few years later, in a snow-covered part of Canada, Anna pulled a sled carrying firewood back to her small house. It turned out she had walked all the way from America to Canada on her own. Anna removed her heavy winter clothes, revealing her gaunt face. As she looked into the fire, she remembered that day. She had thrown her handbag and a lighter into the car, ignoring Jaehyun's screams as she walked away without looking back. Thinking about the past, Yumi let out a scream of pain. And that's where the movie ends. If you enjoyed it, please give the channel a like and a share. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.